Hey everyone, so I think everyone knows me, but in case you don't, I'm Paul Mayer. I'm the population geneticist here, and I'm really excited to, as Lior just mentioned, to tell you kind of a quick high-level 5-8-minute story about the Beethoven study, which we just published in March in Current Biology after, like 2.5, almost 3 years, I think. And before I advance the slide, props to Courtney and marketing for designing this really cool-looking graphic. So first, I just want to acknowledge that we had a huge number of collaborators, over 30 authors from mainly 10 different institutions. It all started at Cambridge, but you'll see in a second how FamilyTree got pulled in. But Max Planck Institute did all the ancient DNA sequencing work, and FamilyTree, really, we used our matching databases and invented some new data tools. So there was a medical and non-medical aspect to this study, and I'll get to that in a minute. But for the genealogical part, here was the core team. So lead author, PhD candidate Tristan, the young man holding the glass of wine and probably needing a refill to answer some reporter's question. And Robert standing to his right, his co-advisor of the famous Attenborough family. Tomas is his main faculty advisor there in the middle, and Martin, who helped tremendously with the genealogical paper trail and tracking people down for testing. And here at FTDNA is Joran, myself, and Michael Sager. We all chipped in. So this study was almost a new genre. You could call it genobiography. It's like ancient DNA, but for more recent historical figures. So the origin of the study was that Tristan pursued his master's on Beethoven studies 10 years ago at the American Beethoven Society at San Jose State, not far from where I grew up in San Jose, California. Eventually, long story short, that culminated in a mission to sequence Beethoven's full genome. So the current study was conceived at Cambridge University and Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, Germany, with the initial goal of sequencing Beethoven's full genome and identifying possible genetic causes of Beethoven's many ailments, famously his hearing loss, but also stomach issues and liver disease. So they started with 8 locks of hair, all attributed to Beethoven with independent provenances, meaning we knew where they came from and roughly where they were. All collected, and this is important, collected at different time points between 1821 and 1827 when he died. 2 of them had completely intact chains of custody. So if you look at the bottom left there, those blue horizontal bars, 2 of them, we knew where they were the entire time between the 1820s and now. And just out of the 2 of them, one of them, called the Stumpf lock, happened to have higher quality DNA, so that's the one we sequenced to high coverage. So we had standards for authenticating these locks of hair, saying that they were actually Beethoven's. They had to, of course, be from a single individual, be male, have XY, have Central European ancestry, have DNA degradation patterns that are consistent with the 19th century sample. So after DNA is no longer in an organism that's living, the enzymes are no longer functioning correctly, so you have what's called deamination, where C's can turn randomly into T's. And ideally, we'd have multiple locks of hair giving the same result, collected at different time points, which would give kind of a consilience of evidence. And I just want to note, this is an unusual ancient DNA study in that the subject actually wanted to be studied. Numerous times he wrote to his doctor, saying that he wanted to be studied after he died. Ironically, his doctor passed away before he did, but he wanted to find out what was wrong with him. But we had a problem. Some of the initial sanity checks threw some red flags. So despite every piece of evidence suggesting this was Beethoven, this was his DNA, his Y chromosome didn't match any other living Beethovens. So if you look at the top left there, the blue arrow would be the Van Beethovens, the actual surname Beethoven, and the red arrow would be Ludwig's biological line, and you can see they're separate. So FamilyTreeDNA got pulled in, we stepped in, with the goals of 1, extra validation to ensure, we already did our work validating the sample, but we wanted to do extra due diligence to ensure the sample was Beethoven's. And number 2, to trace his paternal ancestry to find out what happened. So these are Y DNA results in a little bit more detail. So what you see here is 5 living Beethovens who tested their Y chromosomes to high resolution. They're in blue. And they're living, their family tree, the living Beethovens, their family tree perfectly recapitulates their known family tree. In other words, what's on paper. So they're in a haplogroup in the Y chromosome called R1b, and that's a very common haplogroup in Europe. And Beethoven, the famous Beethoven, Ludwig, doesn't match any of them. He's in haplogroup I1a, which is totally different. The 2 father lines are separated by about 45,000 years, which is about the time humans left Africa. So totally different, which strongly indicates there was what we call an extra pair paternity event. In other words, someone was screwing around in Beethoven's family, somewhere between Ludwig's father, Johann, and going up the tree to his 5th great-grandfather, Ert. One of those Beethovens wasn't a biological ancestor to Ludwig. So that means there are people who are now, just now, finding out that they're related to the most Beethoven of all time. So here's footage of one of them named Thorsten in Germany.
Yeah, what does that feel like to be related to Beethoven?
To be honest, it's quite impressive. Yeah, it's really quite impressive. That's why I have to say I also did some let's say, I did research about my mother family, and they came all from Scandinavia. So I found also some Vikings, some names, but that's really in the long term history, so like 800 years ago or something. But this is really more in the last history. So that's really awesome. No, that's why I didn't expect that. I am still at a moment a little bit speechless. So sorry. Maybe I should go my hour, but it's really. Yeah, that's really cool, to be honest. Really, I'm really looking forward for the next things which will get public. You can mention it. It makes me proud, to be honest. Also, I don't mind. You can mention it. If I put in my next job CV, then when I'm looking for a job, I say, yeah, but the next person.
Change your name.
Yeah. Also Beethoven.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you could understand through his accent, but he wants to put it on a CV. And this is something really cool to him, especially because he didn't know who his father or grandfather were. Actually, his father even didn't know who this guy's grandfather was. So big revelation for him. The other thing FamilyTreeDNA did, we invented a new method to further validate the sample. So again, we have strong evidence this is Beethoven from an intact chain of custody, but imagine we don't know it's his DNA. Well, the sample has thousands of genetic matches, right? Distant cousins in our database. And I'm talking autosomal matches. And those cousins have family trees where they have ancestor locations. And we'd expect those locations to be consistent with Beethoven's ancestor locations, right? Because those thousands of distant cousins should share a recent common ancestor with the man. So here you see Beethoven's ancestors, the white circles, and the heat map is our estimate of where this DNA sample's ancestors should have been. And it's very consistent. It agrees with Beethoven's German ancestry along the northern Rhine River. And then the medical takeaways from this study, we didn't, caveat, we didn't do any of the medical analyses, but I think it's some of the more interesting stuff, so I'll just briefly mention them. So, diseases are complex, as we just heard from Sam. Typically, many genes involved, and having certain mutations can increase your risk of disease, but it's not fatalistic, it's not deterministic. There are many environmental factors too, right? So that's why we have this concept of polygenic risk score. How likely are you to have a disease based only on the genetic aspect? So it's not a diagnosis, but it can be suggestive. So with hearing loss, the authors were a little reluctant to say anything too much in the press because it's not definitive, but we found that he has a strong predisposition to lupus. He's in the 93rd percentile compared to the general population of likelihood to have lupus, which we now know can possibly confer hearing loss. And couple that with the fact that the sample that had lead, that originally led to the hypothesis of lead poisoning, was actually not Beethoven's. It's a female sample, we know now. So that kind of raises new questions and opens new doors. We don't know much about his stomach issues. He was in stomach pain his entire life. But liver cirrhosis is probably the strongest medical conclusion. So there are kind of three main causes oftentimes. There's alcoholism, and we know he was consuming moderate quantities of alcohol, especially near the end, for probably good reasons considering everything he was going through. He had hepatitis B, which can be a major contributor. So we sequenced his genome and found viral hepatitis B DNA mixed in. And he was homozygous. In other words, he had two copies for this mutation in the PNPLA3 gene, the adiponutrin gene, which can be a strong driver of having liver disease later in life. So having all three of these red flags, this could have been a strong genetic cause toward the reason he actually died, which was liver disease. So very interesting stuff. So lastly, we sent out marketing emails in late March advertising that people can match Beethoven, and it's true until the right person takes a big Y test, the mystery is going to remain. What's Beethoven's true name? If not Beethoven, was his dad really his dad? We don't really know the answers to questions like that now, but we may eventually find out thanks to our customers. So this study, again, is kind of the first of its kind, and I can't wait to see how this helps our revenue numbers. So with that, if there's any time, be happy to take any questions, or if not, I can take them offline. Thank you.